These are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Conflict at Your Association, You Don't Say. This webinar is sponsored by Association Reserves, Inc. and Richardson, Harmon Ober, a professional law corporation. My name is Paige Daniels and I'm the marketing manager at Association Reserves. I'll be serving as your moderator for today. Conflict at Your Association, You Don't Say, is a 45-minute webinar that arose from ongoing conversations from two friends and experts in the community association field, Robert Nordlund from Association Reserves and Kelly Richardson from Richardson Harmon Ober. Robert and Kelly presented a well-received webinar last year titled Boards Don't Make These Mistakes. If you're interested, you can view that webinar by searching for it on YouTube or on the Association Reserves website. In follow-up conversations, Robert and Kelly realized they still had much more to say on the subject of helping people live peacefully and productively in community associations. But due to a pool of untrained or poorly trained board members and the industry still being in its early years, most associations find themselves in some level of continual organizational or financial conflict. If they don't fix those fundamental issues, they're going to continue to have conflict. We're here to fix that today. Robert has the perspective of preparing reserve studies nationwide, seeing the conflict caused by common financial mistakes. Kelly is a veteran community association attorney who sees many conflicts arising from the same simple misunderstandings or mistakes. So I believe you're in for a treat today. Due to the number of people attending, everyone has been muted, but you can ask questions at any time by typing your question into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. We'll start our Q&A time at the end with some questions that have been emailed in, so type your questions and we'll get to as many as time allows. Now, before I introduce our speakers and while we're waiting for everyone to get logged in and settled, we'd like to get to know our audience a little better with a few quick polls. Starting with, have you attended one of our prior webinars? Please go ahead and make your selection. Okay, great. Looks like we have a good split today. Welcome, everyone. The second poll, what is your role in the world of association-governed communities? Please go ahead and make your selection. Okay, great. We are showing a lot of board members, but we do have a few in the other categories as well. Great. And one final poll. Have you ever heard Robert or Kelly speak before? Please make your selection. Okay, and another good split. A lot of newcomers though. Thank you everyone for participating. Now it's time to introduce our two speakers. Robert Nordlund is the founder and CEO of Association Reserves and a certified reserve specialist. Association Reserves has prepared over 40,000 reserve studies for associations in all 50 states over the last 29 years. He regularly writes on the topic of reserve studies and speaks at industry functions throughout the nation. Robert leads our corporate office in Calabasas, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, and supervises technical standards throughout our network of 12 Association Reserves regional offices. Kelly Richardson is co-founder and managing partner of Richardson Harmon Ober, a law firm with its headquarters in Pasadena, California. Kelly has been serving the growing community industry throughout Southern California for over 25 years and has been an influential voice on community association issues in California and on a national level. He has received numerous awards as an attorney, writes a column that appears in 14 newspapers, was past president of the Greater Los Angeles chapter of the Community Associations Institute, or CAI, has served 3 terms as a national trustee of CAI, and here in 2016 is serving as CAI's national president. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Robert Nordlund. Robert?
Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Kelly, can I get you to give us a hello, please?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Well, Kelly and I have known each other for a couple of decades now, and I've always respected Kelly's experience and expertise in the field. And now that he's CAI National President, he's got another little star next to his name. But in addition to our bios, Kelly and I share a heart for fixing things, for making things better. And we get a great deal of pleasure when our clients reach that aha moment when they can move on from mistakes or conflicts that bog down their association or that have been bogging them down. In last year's webinar, we talked about things like, what was it, board members' role and meeting length, things like that. And in today's session, we'll address a few root causes of conflict that time didn't allow last year. And as Paige said earlier, we want to help our clients to live peacefully and productively in their associations. Kelly's going to start out sharing a few of his insights, but I want to remind you that if at any time you have a question for one of us speakers today, as Paige said a few moments ago, you can simply type that question into the dialog box, similar to what you see on your screen. Kelly and I enjoy speaking to a live audience, so if at any time we have a question for you, we'll ask you to raise your hands, and that's the little hands raised icon there. And let's give that a practice. So grab your mouse and give me a hands raised click if you're ready for us to start the program today. I'm looking up and down the list of names. Excellent. Got a lot of hands up. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. And Kelly, I welcome you and off to the program.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's fun and interesting having a large group, and you don't realize how large you are out there, but in looking at the large number of attendees, I appreciate, and I know Robert appreciates, all of you who took the time out to attend this webinar. One of the things that it seems like we're always doing as association managers and attorneys and directors is we're fighting fires. We're so often dealing with problems, but we're responding to the symptom or of the problem. We're not dealing with the disease. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about, and the theme today is not dealing with the problems themselves, but dealing with the roots that affect or that create an environment where problems and conflict are more likely. And so just as when you're pulling weeds, you make sure that you get the root of the weed out. You don't just tear the leaves off the top that you can see. We really want to deal with the roots of association conflict. What are the factors, what are the environments and attitudes that germinate and grow into a conflict that then bedevils managers, volunteer directors, and association attorneys. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And as we begin, let's look at what is the role of the board member or the professional manager in a community. As we look at these three photographs, some of you may feel that this really does all too often represent how the board looks at its role and how the homeowners look at the board. You're the judges, you're the law enforcement, and you're even the grim executioner. Not very exciting prospect to volunteer for that type of a situation. But let me suggest a very different way of looking at yourselves as volunteers or managers or attorneys that serve common interest communities, and that is as educator, not as executioner or law enforcement, cop, judge, but somebody who is educating the neighbors, educating the fellow board members on a consistent basis. I think the truly excellent community association manager, the truly excellent common interest community attorney needs to recognize that you're always teaching, you're always educating, you're always training. And the better trained and educated communities, the better trained and educated boards, the better community you're going to come up with and the less conflict. So that's the model that I'd like to suggest you look at yourself as within that model as an educator. So now let's, as we've looked about who we are, let's check our attitudes about who they are. What do we assume when we're dealing with conflict with another member of the community or even a director across the board table from us? All too often, we make assumptions that we're dealing with somebody who's truly evil. It's so unfortunate how often people will write me or call me and say, oh, so-and-so is just, they're just evil. They just hate the HOA. They want to tear the association apart. Frankly, I don't know that that's fair. It's not any more logical to assume that the person that calls with upset is a complete demon than to assume that they're a complete saint and everything they say is gospel and needs to be immediately handled. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, that people start out with certain assumptions and situations and they may become upset, but it's very rare that people come to the board meeting in open forum or sitting around the deliberation table in the board meeting. It's very rare that they don't truly believe they're serving the best interests of the community, that they think they know what is needed. And yes, they may not express it well, but I think a healthy way of dealing with people is don't let people jump to the evil conclusion. Give people a chance. Give them an opportunity to deal with you. And yes, they may be upset, but if we look at them as a person who's not bad or good, but who has certain information and has certain problems that need to be dealt with, we may find ourselves responding to conflict or to the potential of conflict in a much better way. Now, here's another issue in terms of information, is we, in terms of the general real estate owning public, we set ourselves up for failure by not continuously emphasizing the basic concept of common interest community ownership. Shared ownership, that's the concept. And as communities, we need to always focus on educating our neighbors, our boards, in the concept that we have a shared interest. The whole reason associations are beneficial is because it allows people to do things that they couldn't do individually. Shared ownership, shared control, shared responsibility, and of course the shared cost. Now, if you're going to share something, that means somebody else is going to have their hand on the steering wheel with you. And most of the time when I see folks that are upset with the concept of common interest communities, they're upset because they don't really want to share. They want to drive the bus themselves. Well, if you're going to drive the bus yourselves and you don't want to answer to anybody and you want to take care of all the cost and responsibility, then maybe a common interest community isn't for you. But on the other hand, I think we don't sufficiently emphasize to homeowners the benefits of shared ownership, control, responsibility, and cost. Here's another example on the screen here. As you look at a condo patio yard, a balcony patio, the first reaction is always, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. Well, they forget that most of the time these areas are designated as exclusive use. And because nobody has ever explained to homeowners what is exclusive use and what actually is the real estate interest that they own, they look at that patio yard, they look at that balcony and say, this is mine, it's my exclusive. And so the board can't tell me what to do, and it's my area. Well, they miss the next couple of words in the description. In California, we call these exclusive use common areas. In other states, as you're listening, you may have different names, but the basic concept is the same. This is an area that is part of the common area owned by the entire community, but it's used simply by one of the unit owners only. And we often don't realize that the average real estate purchaser, when they buy into a condominium type property in particular, they see the word exclusive and they don't go to the next word, which is, oh, it's not my exclusive ownership, it's my exclusive use, and it's still common area. A lot of times, folks, when people appear to be flaunting the association rules, and they put the bicycles on the balcony when they're not supposed to be there under HOA rule, they're not often flaunting or the rule on purpose. They may not realize that the balcony is under association control. Yes, they get to use it, but it's our balcony. We all control the balconies for the benefit of the folks in the community. So right there, one of the banes of the community association lawyer existence are these disputes about how people use exclusive use areas, and we can really cut a lot of those disputes down if we consistently educate our homeowners. Remember, we all share control of these, even though we individually use these areas, and that can help a lot. Again, this is one of those classic examples where don't go in assuming people are disrespecting the association governance. They may not truly understand that this is something that they share with the community. It's not mine, it's ours. Okay, so the next concept is kind of related, and that is that we need to keep in mind that most, particularly first-time homeowners in common interest communities, they're coming in with expectations that frankly are not realistic because nobody's told them any different. We think that because we have a deed to the property that it's our castle. And so we think of independence and don't bother me, and this is all, this is mine. They also often assume that because it's an apartment that I own, that somehow that's going to be a higher quality residence than the apartment that I rented right across the street. And in most jurisdictions, the condominium construction standards are exactly the same as apartment construction standards. The only difference is the paperwork. You own the condominium while you rent that apartment, but structurally they're typically the same. So they assume because they spent $800,000 for that condominium apartment that it's going to be qualitatively very different than the $900 a month apartment that they rented before they bought their condo. And so they assume that they're not going to hear noise in the hallway. They assume they're not going to hear footsteps overhead, and unfortunately that's just not true. So a lot of times you're having people coming in that really don't understand what they're getting into. Another issue, again, and you see the common theme here in education, is that a lot of our homeowners are coming to the communities and they really aren't being told by the real estate professionals, hey, those CC&Rs, you need to read those every bit as carefully as you do the purchase contract. Unfortunately, the reality is that I think the vast majority of owners come into a common interest community and they get the CC&Rs, they get the bylaws and the community rules, and they figure they're going to look at it at some point in the future. And that's a real mistake because they're not going to find out until after they become an owner that they can't park their recreational vehicle in the driveway, for example. Or they may think that they may not realize that the association limits people to one pet and they may be moving in with 3 pets. Had they reviewed the CC&Rs, they would have found that pet limitation. So one of the problems that we have is a lot of our members are coming in and learning after the fact all the do's and don'ts of that shared ownership situation. So again, we need to educate folks as much as possible, and frankly, one of my challenges in the real estate community is trying to educate realtors and brokers that they have to get folks to look at the governing documents before they become owners, not after. In my newspaper column, I think I've mentioned at least once or twice a year, I beg the general real estate owning public, please don't look at this as boilerplate. This is every bit as much a contract as your purchase agreement document. You didn't sign it, but it's a contract because it's been recorded and it's a covenant that runs with the land. So be aware that people didn't look at this stuff. So again, have a little more understanding when we're getting into those enforcement situations, and to the extent that you can educate people as they're coming in, wouldn't it be wonderful if every association, a manager, had a letter that went out when they send the disclosure documents to a prospective buyer? Wouldn't it be great if you had a letter urging the homeowner to carefully read the governing documents before they close escrow? Just a thought. All right, another source of conflict or misunderstanding in associations is often that we just don't realize people are not seeing the same thing you're seeing. There's the old parable of the blind monks that were introduced to an elephant, and all of them had in contact with different points of the elephant. The one person held on to the tusks and said, "Wow, this is like a log." It's another person touched the trunk and said, "No, it's a giant snake." Another person touched the leg and said, "Oh, this is a mighty tree." Were any of them lying? But all of them were experiencing something completely different than the other people. That's very much analogous to homeowner communities, commoners communities, in that a lot of times people aren't going to see the same thing. They're not going to have the same information, and so they're going to report something that you as the board or manager don't know, or you're going to tell the homeowner something that they don't know. It doesn't mean that anybody's lying, but I think we need to again be more lenient with people and start from the assumption that they may not have the same knowledge, they may not have the same observation as we do, and that may help diffuse situations of conflict. Another important concept that will help reduce conflict, and within boards in particular, is we have to unlearn something. We spend our whole life learning. Well, here's one time I'm going to ask you to unlearn something. We learn that certain things from our daytime experience in the workplace, in education, whatever our field is, but our volunteer experience is completely different. So let's examine the two different paradigms at this time. First of all, let's look at what your day job chain of command is like. We learned from elementary school that teacher is our boss, and teacher has a boss called a principal. And we may learn at some point that even the principal has a boss, and that's the school board. It's all about chain of command. We get our first job at a fast food joint, and we understand there's an assistant manager, and then there's a manager, and everybody has responsibility over something. The chain of command. Well, that's our day job. That's what we learned during the daytime that made us successful in whatever our field of endeavor was. But now let's look at the night job chain of command, because it's no longer vertical. Now it's horizontal. The chain of command starts and stops with the board of directors, a group, no one person. And that's a very, very different style of power. And so we're used to being action-oriented people. We're used to having authority in our day job. But then we come into the boardroom as volunteers, and we have to set aside all that. And we have to set aside our desire to take charge and be action-oriented, and remember that we have 4 other colleagues in that 5-member board, or 6 and 7-member board, or whatever that board size is. We make decisions as a group. The boss is the board, not any one person. Board work is a team sport. It's not an individual event. Some of you may remember the A-Team. I couldn't resist. But other examples of team sports. Board work is absolutely not an individual event. It works, and it works well as a team. That's how it's set up. But that's very different from our day job. And one of the people most affected by this change is the president of the association. Here's a day job president, Mr. Obama, who of course can write out an executive order, and it happens. He can send ships around the world. And then there's this other guy here who used to have a reality TV show. Who would have thought he'd be famous now in 2016 for a completely different reason? And you remember his tagline, "You're fired," right? Well, these are day job presidents, but the nonprofit president is very different. The nonprofit president has some very limited powers. They call meetings of the board. They set agendas, usually, hopefully, with the professional manager. They chair the board meeting. There's only one vote in that meeting. And they appoint committees. If their bylaws provide for that power, they may form task forces. But they're the leader, they're not the boss. The boss in the nonprofit common interest community is the board of directors. That's the boss. And so it's a very, very different paradigm. Well, the last thing I'd like to talk about in terms of trying to keep communities healthy and avoiding major conflict and upheaval is recognizing that the common interest community manager, the common interest community board, juggles 4 different worlds in that single community. And you may be able to see here on the slide that we've got a picture of a young man who's apparently juggling 4 different worlds, globes. So let's talk about those 4 different worlds as we wrap up my part of the presentation. Common interest communities are simultaneously a corporation, they're a business, they're a real estate project, and a community of neighbors. And each of those characteristics have to be balanced for the community to be truly healthy. Now let's talk about each of these characteristics and what they are. First of all, a common interest community is a corporation. It may not be incorporated, most are, but it's still a legal entity. There are legal processes to be observed. There are legalities that have to be obeyed. There are rules, there are covenants that have to be attended to. And so the formalities are an important aspect. And of course, we lawyers, we tend to talk most about the corporate type issues. But there's so much more than that. There's the business interest. The business interest, we're spending people's money. We're budgeting. We're trying to be prudent with the assessments. We're making sure people pay. It's also a real estate project. We have to maintain, we have to preserve, protect the common areas in the community. And lastly, it's a community of neighbors. These are people that have to live together. So what happens if we over or underemphasize these particular interests, if we get out of balance? Well, the corporate the corporate characteristic of an association. What does it look like when it becomes overemphasized, when it becomes too important? Well, the only thing that matters is the letter of the law. For an overemphasis in this area, we're going to make sure we have rules on everything. We're going to try to avoid discretion and words like reasonable. We're going to enforce every single violation of everything. The lawyer's going to be at every board meeting. We're not going to make a move without the lawyer approving it. That sounds horrible. There's not enough lawyers to go around to do that, and who could afford that? That's an awful scenario. What if we underemphasize the corporate legalities? Had an association several years ago came to meet with me, 24 homes, nice folk, and they had some very specific questions. During the course of the meeting, I said, I noted that they were telling me something that they were doing, and I was looking at a particular page in the CC&Rs that specifically contradicted what they were doing, and I pointed out, well, folks, do you realize that your CC&Rs say this and this and this, and you're doing that and that and that? And the president, very, very nice man, turned to me and said, Mr. Richardson, please don't take offense, but our association does everything by agreement. We don't really care what the law says, and we don't really care what the governing documents say as long as we all agree. Well, that's an example, probably an extreme one, of an association that was underemphasizing the legalities, the corporate nature, the formalities aspects of the association. Now, that approach can work great for a little while, but all it takes is one person to begin disagreeing, and then everything falls apart. What about the business aspect? What if it's overemphasized? What does that look like? Well, some of you may have had times where your association was so concerned with the bottom line being the bottom line that anything that cost money was immediately vetoed by the board of directors. And that's dangerous, because when we overemphasize the cost control aspect of the association, then we're not going to want to hire professional managers. They cost money. We're certainly not going to hire a civil engineer to look at that retaining wall, because civil engineers cost money. We're probably not going to be adequately putting money in our reserve account, because, oh, well, that makes the assessments higher, and anything that involves money going out the door we're against. You begin to see, though, how short-sighted that approach is if all we focus on is, I've got to keep the assessments, I've got to keep the budget as low as possible. Now, the other side, what happens when an association underemphasizes the business aspect? Well, there are a couple of ways that happens. I from time to time, see associations that don't bother to get competitive bids. They just go out and they hire somebody they like to do a job. They don't get any consultant to check on the cost control, and the money just flies out the door. That's not fair. Some associations will not want to vigorously collect their assessments because, well, it's a hostile thing. It's a shame to go after people in foreclosure or in court, and we don't want to do that. Well, that's not protecting the business interests of the association, so that's got to be in balance. What about the real estate project? We're going to maintain, we're going to paint, we're going to replace things when they wear out. If we overemphasize that, well, a crude example of that would be we're going to paint everything in the property every 18 months. Wouldn't that look beautiful? Sure, it'd look great. Who can afford to paint everything every 18 months? That's quite extravagant. So we have to balance the real estate project and how beautiful we would like everything to be with economic realities. What about if we underemphasize the care and maintenance of our common area property? Well, oftentimes that's because the association is trying too hard to control costs, and they're ignoring the real cost that things deteriorate, things need to be maintained, and so they let the project go to seed. The last interest I want to talk about is the community interest. The community interest, quite frankly, we lawyers aren't very good at talking about, because we're all about the law, the law, the law, the law, but the community aspect of the association is talking about people. We're talking about what is the impact on the neighbors of our decision. Is this a situation where maybe we legally can do something, maybe we can afford to do something, maybe it might be a nice enhancement to the property, but you know what? The community doesn't want it. Or maybe it's going to be something that, even though it's the board's authority to take this action, it's going to be divisive, because we really should at least consult the community on this decision. That's how the community aspect needs to be attended to. When this is not sufficiently attended, and I'm sorry to say that it's probably one of the more commonly underemphasized of these 4 characteristics. When we're focused, we're not thinking about the community the board of directors is running on. It's not listening to people in open forum. It's not having town hall meetings. It's not communicating very well. It's not exercising discretion. That we're not going to enforce every violation, no matter how technical, of the rules. That's when community is underemphasized. Can community be overemphasized? Well, sure. That 24-unit association that came to meet with me several years ago, that would be a prime example of an association that says the only thing that matters to us is community. We don't care about the legalities and corporate stuff. We're not even that interested in the business aspects. As long as we agree on it, that's the only thing that matters. So when we overemphasize community, we're probably going to be less likely to collect delinquent assessments because, well, that's unpleasant and people are struggling. So we need to have that in balance as well. We need to have the legalities, the finances, the real estate, project maintenance, and the neighborhood aspects all balanced. If we have our community going through struggles, oftentimes managers, directors, volunteers, you may find that one or more of these 4 characteristics have fallen out of balance. They're not being sufficiently attended to. So check your association and see how you're doing on these. If you're healthy right now and things are going great, this is a perfect time to make sure that you continue to keep these in balance. And as you're making good decisions as a board or as managers, you're keeping in contact with all 4 of these values. And that will lead to a much less conflict-oriented community and a much happier environment for your common interest community neighbors. So with that, Robert, what are some other sources of conflict?
Well, actually, I was sitting here thinking the unfortunate reality that conflict is real at community associations. It can arise from a number of different sources, and you were talking about the different things that get out of balance, and I was thinking that there's problems with conflict when you have scarcity. It could be scarcity of time. You don't know, haven't taken the time to read the governing documents. You haven't researched it. You haven't taken time to learn something. Scarcity of money, scarcity of power, not comfortable sharing it. So there's literally a minefield out there. But the great thing is that we've seen enough of these problems that Kelly and I see some adjustments that you can make, and as Kelly said, rebalancing things, some adjustments in what you're actually doing, or maybe some minor adjustments in your mindset, and that doesn't necessarily even take some action, just some words. So there's some things you can do on the financial side of things, and the first off is just beginning to live in reality. There's too many associations that live in fantasy land. They're deficit budgeting every year. They are running a deficit, and that's causing scarcity of money, and that's causing tension and conflict. And just a few dollars more per month, a few dollars more per year, make those problems go away. They're failing to acknowledge the reality of bad debt, delinquencies, surprises that always happen. It might be an insurance deductible, a necessary touch-up repair, enough money for your reserve contributions. It's having enough margin to run the association. And the important thing to understand is that don't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. You can't expect a fairy godmother to come to the rescue. It's just not going to happen. There's a reality factor out there that the boards need to address with respect to their budget. And then another item that we see regularly is associations thinking that reserve contributions are for the future. Now be careful with my words here. This is just a mindset, a perspective, because reserve expenses by and large are in the future, but the contributions you make as part of your budget offset ongoing deterioration. The ongoing deterioration happens every day, happens every week, happens every month, and it's only fair that current owners pay their fair share of that fractional daily, weekly, monthly deterioration. And the great thing is the future is going to work out just fine if everyone takes care of the present. It's fundamentally unfair to not pay your fair share. And if someone says, I don't want to pay reserve contributions, it's not my problem, the answer is, it is your problem. You're using it. it's deteriorating while you own a unit, while you own a home at the association, and it's unfair to press your responsibility, your cost, onto someone else. And talking about cost, Kelly touched on this when he was talking about the balance of the real estate there at the association. It's very expensive not to maintain the common areas. It has the effect of a net higher expense for the association and lower property values. I took a picture here of a gentleman fixing the ironwork railing around a pool perimeter fence. Now, pool perimeter fence ironwork typically costs $6 to $10 a lineal foot to paint. You do that every few years. This gentleman here is getting somewhere between $50 and $80 a lineal foot to do a repair. And the thing is that, so that's a better part of, that's maybe 8 times more expensive than the painting. And after he's done with the welding repairs, the association still needs to paint. It's the same type of thing that goes on with roof care, with asphalt care, deck issues where associations fail to seal or protect the deck. The point I want to make is that proper, timely maintenance, well executed, saves the association money and keeps the association looking sharp, which maintains and maximizes property values. So that's a classic mistake, thinking that you're saving money when indeed what you're doing is actually spending money. Another factor is a source of conflict is thinking reserve contributions are a luxury. You say, that's not for us. We can't afford that. That's something that the other people do, maybe the one percenters. Well, that problem is that that's just not true. As I indicated a moment ago, reserve contributions are the fair way that each owner pays their fair share of ongoing deterioration. So it's a bill as real as any other bill at the association. And paying your bill is not optional. It's something we do as grown-ups in an organized world. Across the country, 30% of associations have a strong reserve fund. This is not the exception. 30% of associations have a strong reserve fund, and it's a very attainable objective. So pay your ongoing cost of deterioration. It's as real as any other bill, and it's not that large of a bill. Reserve contributions for the typical condo here in the US are about as much as a premium coffee per day, anywhere from $2 to $5 per day. So it's really not a lot of money. So when associations come up to me and say, hey, Robert, it's great, you've made a real good pitch, but we just can't afford it. And it seems like half the time they're in a nice looking outfit at an event that costs money to go to, and I'm reminded that the cost of making appropriately sized reserve contributions is just a few dollars a day, and it's a matter of choices. It's not being unable to afford it, it's just choosing to not afford it. And we can all make choices, and what we're here to talk about today is wise choices, helping you make wise choices to minimize conflict at your association. Well, the bottom line is that Kelly and I have been each working as guides for decades, helping our association clients move down, figuratively, the trail, trying to get them towards a successful future. And we see the same root sources of conflict over and over again. That's what caused us to want to do this session, providing solutions. And what we can do here is help you step around a few obstacles, keep you on the main trail, keep you from going off into the bushes and other avoidable obstacles that cause the stress and conflict. Well, we've only, again, briefly touched the surface. I feel another webinar coming on next year this time. So I want to point you to some resources that hopefully can help in the interim. If you go to the Association Reserves website, which is www.reservesday.com, you'll see some resources here, specifically our Learning Center with some written and video resources. You can request a proposal, you can join our email list and get notifications of future webinars like this one, and our newsletter that has good financial helpful hints. And you can also go to the Richardson Harmon Ober Professional Kelly Professional Consultant, Professional Corporation, PC. Right?
Yeah. Right.
Their website, again, you look at the top and you'll see a news link. Click on that and you can sign up for their newsletter. You've heard Kelly talk about he's in the newspaper. He's got great information on his website. We're here to help you get to a successful future and minimize conflict at your association so you can move on, have maximized property values and success with your association. So on behalf of Kelly and myself, we want to thank you for taking a few minutes to attend our program today. We hope we're able to point out a few helpful tips. Hope that you picked up a few gems that you may not have potentially understood before or maybe understood incorrectly so that you can make some minor course corrections, those significant changes that hopefully bring peace and success to your association. And so with the few minutes we have available, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Paige, who's going to serve as our MC for the Q&A portion of our program. Paige.
Thank you, Robert and Kelly. As I mentioned earlier, you can ask one of our presenters a question by typing your question into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. Our first question is, our board does not enforce all of the CC&Rs. What can be done to ensure that they stop enforcing some CC&Rs and not others? Selective enforcement?
Well, it's not as simple a question as it at first appears. It's very easy to say that associations and their managers should be enforcing all of the governing documents, not just the pages that they like. But at the same time, associations also have, the boards also have the discretion to make reasonable decisions where circumstances warrant to handle things in a way which may not be apparent to some homeowners who think the board is ignoring a situation. For example, I routinely recommend that associations not deal with disciplinary issues out in the public view of the association, that those are handled confidentially, and that the privacy and dignity of the violator is protected. But that often looks to the outside world as if the association is looking the other way. So yes, as a general rule, associations, if you're not going to enforce all of your rules, then maybe some of those rules should be deleted. But on the other hand, don't assume, homeowners, that the board is doing nothing, because a lot of times I'm in the background and I'm writing letters or dealing with the situation and trying to keep it from turning into a court case, and all of that's happening outside of the view and the knowledge of the community at large.
Great, thank you. Next question is, does this concept of ownership change much when things like the pool and community center are a leasehold of, say, 25 years versus ownership?
Well, I don't customarily see common area amenities under leasehold type arrangements. So I would really want to look more closely at that situation before I make a blanket statement. Generally speaking, if the association has an amenity that it obtains either by lease or by ownership for the benefit of the whole community, then it should be treated as a common benefit to the community. But beyond that, I'd have to look more closely at what that situation is.
Okay, next question is, how do you respond to an original owner who did not receive the CC&Rs from the developer until months after closing? How do you respond to them about their violation of CC&Rs, especially when the owner states that he had verbal agreement with the developer?
Kelly, these are absolutely fascinating questions. This is what keeps me interested after all these years.
Yeah, that's a sad situation, because as a legal matter, because CC&Rs are recorded on the property, the owner is deemed to have received them and be bound by them the moment they take title. And unfortunately, because homeowners typically don't know how important those documents are, they don't think to even ask for them before they close escrow. And that's exactly the kind of disaster that can happen where, hey, the covenants are going to bind you even though you didn't get a copy, but now you're going to find out about all the effect on you long after it's too late. So, I mean, as a general rule, realtors need to know this, home buyers need to know this. You've got to make sure you look at those governing documents, those rules, those use restrictions before you close escrow.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we have time for one last question. And that question is, how should the communications with the association attorney be handled? By the board member to maintain attorney-client privilege, or by the management company representative?
Well, typically the answer I prefer is both. The management company representative is answering to the board, and the attorney-client privilege does attach to communications where the intermediary is a necessary party to the communication chain. So the manager is covered by the privilege and is just as required as the board is to protect that. I prefer when an association comes to me for help, I typically ask them, please designate who are my two contact points, one of them being the manager, because the day-to-day questions are really going to come from the manager. But I also ask that a single director, not always the president, sometimes it's a lawyer on the board, but a single person be my board point of contact. And then what I tell the board is that on any significant opinions whatsoever, make sure you all give me your email, because the question or the assignment's going to come from one person, but I'm going to reply to the whole board so that they know what their lawyer is saying. That's how I handle it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Robert and Kelly. That concludes our webinar. If anyone is interested in a recorded version of this or any other webinar, you can search for it on YouTube or find it on the Association Reserves website, www.reservestudy.com, and on the Richardson Harmon Ober website, www.rhopc.com. As you exit this webinar, a survey will display. If you could help us out by completing the survey, we'll be happy to email you an outline of the key points Robert and Kelly addressed today. That will also include answers to the questions, including the unanswered ones. I want to thank you all for attending. If you have any questions or if there's any way we can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again. Goodbye.